if you had to pick three things to distinguish yourself from your opponent,
Yeah.
what would those three things be?
They're found in the three major issues of the campaign. The Congressman and I agree that three big issues in this campaign are jobs / the economy, education, and state government. And the contrast between the two of us could not be stronger. I said this at the debate the other night. I mean, look at the difference in approaching jobs. My approach is level playing field, reduce costs for all businesses, regulatory reform, unemployment insurance reform, workers' comp. Step back and let them do what they do best. You know, regulatory reform alone is a big deal because it's so hard for businesses to know what regulations mean, how costly it is to comply, how long it's going to take to go through the regulatory process. That uncertainty is just deadly for planning and for investment. And you know, I've talked to literally hundreds and hundreds of business owners around the state, and they all are pulling their hair out over a regulatory burden which is getting heavier and heavier. And I'm not saying we gut protections for worker safety or environment or anything else, but I don't understand why we can't apply the same kind of zero-based budget approach or the same kind of lean manufacturing mentality, same kind of process analysis to regulations that we are supposed to be applying to outlays, to spending. Because regulations cost money too, to implement and then to comply with. My opponent says, well, the first thing we're going to do is invite the private sector to join us in restructuring the economy because the state can't do it by itself. That's pretty darn near a quote from his brochure. He wants to invite the private sector to help him restructure the state economy. He wants to create a new office of economic competitiveness. He wants to hire more people into the governor's office who will oversee different sectors of the economy. Wants to decide which industries are the favorites and give them special tax breaks. And just as significant as what he says he wants to do is what he doesn't say. There is nothing in his jobs plan about regulatory reform, workers' comp, unemployment insurance, or the BNR tax. Zero. He is silent on all of those things. And it's not surprising. I mean, he's being backed by the people who've been controlling Olympia for 28 years. And that's very evident when you look at the second big issue, which is education. Here he's adopted more of a clinch strategy that you see in boxing. He's trying to make it look like we're really not that far apart. Don't be fooled by that. We're very far apart. There's a reason that Stand for Children endorsed me. This is a left-leaning group that is so frustrated with the WEA and the other forces of the status quo that they endorsed me after thoroughly interviewing both of us. And they said very strongly and clearly they're with me and they're campaigning actively for me. My education reform plan is based largely on a plan put together by the largest coalition in the state, the Excellent Schools Now Coalition. It's called the A+ Plan for Education. And what's remarkable about this coalition is how broad it is. It includes left-leaning groups, business groups, parent activists, the Gates Foundation, you name it. They're all in it, and it's all evidence-based. I mean, consider the fact that Governor Jeb Bush, his Foundation on Education Excellence, works with Stand for Children, which was founded by Marion Wright Edelman's son, Jonah. I mean, you could not find two people much farther apart of the political polls. And then they're both funded by the Gates Foundation. But they're all in agreement because they're all using evidence-based approaches to reform. What works? And they're saying, we know what works now. We know, for example, that having a great teacher is the single most important variable in a child's likelihood of success. 20 times more powerful than poverty. Right? So what do we want to do? You know, what I want to do is pay teachers more when they're great teachers. Pay for performance. Absolutely a no-no for my opponent and the teachers union. I want to pay them differently based on where they teach. If they teach in the most challenging school, I want to pay them more, provided they're a great teacher. I want to get rid of last in, first out. The combination of those policies that we have today is that in every urban school district in the state, according to the University of Washington research, the least amount of money is spent per child in the poorest schools, and the largest amount of money is spent per child in the wealthiest schools. And that's because the dollars follow the adults, not the kids. So if you go to any inner city school, what you're going to find is the least experienced teaching faculty in the district, right? On average, they have the least experienced teachers. When there are layoffs, they're decimated because the first ones to get laid off are the newest teachers, regardless of quality or ability. We've got to give these teachers great school principals. There's not enough accountability for educational results with the principals. I spent 9 years on my school foundation board in Bellevue. We brought in, or say the school trustees brought in a new superintendent named Mike Riley in '96. First thing he did, well, not the first thing, after several months, what he did was he fired a third of the principals for not being effective enough. he moved all the other principals around, got them out of the schools they'd been in for years, and he said, your job is to guarantee instructional quality in your school. You will spend 30 to 40% of your time in the classroom. And there are principals right now who do it. There are just not very many of them. I visited Mercer Middle School on Beacon Hill in Seattle. It's one of the 5 or 6 top middle schools in the state. And yet they have 90% free and reduced lunch, 90% children of color, high percentage of kids whose parents are immigrants. And they have raised their achievement from like 13% in science to over 84% in science for 8th graders. That principal is in those classrooms all the time, working with those teachers, mentoring them, supporting them. Every teacher deserves a principal who actually has a detailed knowledge of their teaching abilities, not just someone who's in their classroom twice a year for their evaluations. And then the principals in turn need to be given something. They need to be given more control over their schools, more control in exchange for accountability. Don't force a principal to take a teacher who hasn't worked out somewhere else. I don't know if you followed what happened up in Gig Harbor recently with a middle school teacher who took part in the bullying of one of his students. He sat on him, they piled chairs on the students. Horrific, right? What did he get? He got a 10-day suspension, some training, and now he's teaching in a different school. I mean, this is crazy. Don't make a principal take a teacher who hasn't worked out somewhere else. But in exchange for that autonomy or that control over who staffs their building, they've got to be accountable for the results you get. And make the superintendents accountable. Bring charter schools into the mix. We're one of only 9 states in the whole country that doesn't allow even one charter school, and we're the only big state. The other 8 states are states like South Dakota, West Virginia, Arkansas, small rural states. We ought to allow them in the mix. And, allowing 40 of them, which is what Initiative 1240 would do, out of 2,300 or more schools doesn't seem outlandish to me. Mm-hmm. And where you want to focus them is where you have poor children and low-income parents who can't move. Because what other parents do, if they're dissatisfied, is they pick up and move. Mm-hmm. We've seen that. I had a parent today who lives in, his kids are in the Issaquah School District, say that he was struck by how many more first graders there are than kindergartners in his kid's school. 7 first grade classes and 4 kindergarten classes. He's going, how could that be? They're all people moving in from Seattle. Mm-hmm. They work for public schools, they put their kid into public school, and then after 1 year they leave. At least those parents left. The point is, every child should have access to a great education regardless of where they live, and the poorest children need the help the most. There's a big difference. Inslee is opposed to charter schools, he's opposed to pay for performance. He won't support these changes that all the evidence shows you need to do, and these are the changes that other states have made that succeeded in Race to the Top. We came in at the bottom, 32nd out of 36 states. Did you hear the governor or the superintendent of public instruction stand up and scream bloody murder? Did they stand up and say this is unacceptable that we came in at the bottom? No. When the National Math and Science Initiative gave a state a $13.2 million grant to replicate the NConnect program here, and then the union said, oh, no, that looks too much like merit pay because you're going to be paying teachers extra for this AP training. They handed the check back. Did you hear an outcry in Olympia? No. I mean, you've got to have leadership that's willing to make some of the adults uncomfortable in order to put the kids first. And that's why we have this big coalition. It also includes some Democratic legislators, like Eric Pettigrew in Seattle, who are ready for charter schools and ready for these other changes because we're just not getting the results. So that's the big difference in education. On state government reform, Inslee really doesn't say anything about it except to claim that he's going to implement lean principles. He used that phrase over. I was going to sock him, at one point. Come on. He's never done. He hasn't had his relatively little management experience. He ran a congressional office. Never implemented lean there. We didn't see lean being used in the federal government. He's never been a proponent of it. And then he said, well, this is the big difference between me and Gregoire. Gregoire issued an executive order a year ago ordering lean to be implemented finally. And come on, whereas not only have I implemented lean, but I was the first agency to implement performance management, which is a system created by the Department of Personnel, became available in 2006. It's enabled under the same civil service reform statute. The idea is you start to pay people based on their performance, not just on seniority. I implemented it immediately. There's a very rigorous performance evaluation system you have to put in place. Everyone's evaluated 100% twice a year. The managers are reviewed 360 degrees. And the unions hate it because they want everyone to get paid the same, based strictly on job class and on seniority. So they're just, I love the contrast because I think voters deserve a clear choice, and we've got it here.